Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestle News 365. Hope everyone is doing very, very well. As always, we have a ton of WWE news stories to get into today. So let's start off with the big story, the one you can see to my right there on the screen. And that is WWE is discussing an upcoming return, possibly for John Cena, that coincides with the return of live fans to WWE programming as WWE prepares to go back on tour. Because Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer newsletter is reporting that John Cena is being discussed for a big WWE return in July. Now, of course, it was announced yesterday that the July 16 episode of Friday Night SmackDown on Fox will be the beginning of the company returning to touring. And Meltzer has noted that John Cena has been, quote, discussed for a return at the show. Now, it's long been rumoured that with fans coming back to WWE programming, this could bring about the big returns of the big guns to WWE, whether that's Becky Lynch, John Cena, Brock Lesnar, etc., all of whom have missed the majority of the pandemic era of professional wrestling, especially on the WWE side of things. Now, as of right now, there's no word on if WWE is hoping to have Cena back for just the Friday Night SmackDown show on July 16, or if the company is planning a program or an angle of sorts regarding this 16-time former WWE World Heavyweight Champion that could coincide with possibly a match at SummerSlam or something like that. So time will only tell. I don't know if this is, John Cena, I was about to say that I don't know if this is a massive story. Of course, John Cena returning to WWE program is a massive story. He's on the Mount Rushmore of WWE wrestlers. He's the my generation, certainly, our Hulk Hogan. He is the guy. He is a 16-time former world champion, and he's fallen into that real elite category, I suppose, of WWE talent that have transcended the industry, transcended WWE, and now they're a major star in Hollywood and in films and in television. John Cena's a big star. He's going to be in the Fast and Furious films. He's going to be in the Suicide Squad. He's going to have his own Peacemaker television series. That was the reason why, of course, that John Cena wasn't at WrestleMania this year. There was a big thought, and I think rightfully so, there was a big thought process that with WrestleMania 37 being the return of fans this year, having fans in attendance, 25,000 fans there for both evenings. The thought process was, well, John Cena, he's definitely going to come back for WrestleMania. Surely he's going to come back for WrestleMania. He was going to be at WrestleMania 36 last year inside Raymond James Stadium, but because of the pandemic, it was shut down. Moved to the Performance Center in front of 0 fans at the WWE Performance Center on a closed set. It was taped, and because of that, his match that was scheduled to face against The Fiend, Bray Wyatt, was changed into a cinematic presentation, the Firefly Funhouse match, if you can call it a match. John Cena lost that match, and we haven't seen him since. A lot of thought was, well, he'll come back. He'll come back for WrestleMania 37 this year, but of course he didn't. Now, I don't know if WWE wanted him to or not. I'm sure that John Cena probably wanted to. It was just mathematically and physically impossible for John Cena to make WrestleMania 37. End of. I don't think it was even up for discussion. John Cena, as I mentioned, as part of the Suicide Squad film series, part of that franchise, he plays Peacemaker, that character in that series, and James Gunn, the director and writer of the Suicide Squad, had written a TV series for HBO Max around John Cena's Peacemaker character. John Cena is, I believe he's still in Vancouver, Canada, I think. He might have, I think it wraps in June, his production there. Nevertheless, he was in Vancouver in Canada, and again, I don't know what the issues are like now in terms of traveling, but at the time, it was a case of if he were to come back to the United States for WrestleMania, he would have to quarantine for 2 weeks. He would then do WrestleMania. He would go back to Canada. He would have to quarantine for another 2 weeks. This would involve shutting production down on a multi-million-dollar production schedule. They'd have to shut it down for a month. That would cost, millions and millions and millions of dollars on a very tight schedule. I'm sure those at Warner Brothers would not be happy. Those in the HBO Max subsidiary of Warner Brothers would not be happy. So, no, it was just not going to happen. John Cena could not quarantine for a month for one WrestleMania appearance, even though I'm sure he would have loved to appear at the show. And I think a lot of people at the time went, you know what, it is disappointing, but John Cena's hardly been a real present figure on WWE programming for a while now. He transitioned into becoming a part-time star in 2015, around that period of time, and ever since then he's come back here and there for spates and spells, but he's not a full-time guy at all anymore. So the feeling was, well, it's disappointing, but look, John Cena's John Cena at this point. When he comes back, it'll be great to have him back, and maybe it's worth having him back when fans are back on a permanent basis. Maybe, and that was the thought process at the time. So it was okay, it is what it is. Now that the announcement has been made that WWE are returning to touring in July, fans are returning in July for that July 16 episode of SmackDown, then Money in the Bank, then Monday Night Raw, and then you've got this 25-city tour that WWE are doing. It makes a lot of sense that John Cena would return. As I mentioned, as far as I'm aware, John Cena's Peacemaker production wraps filming in June. I don't know what the quarantine situation is like with Canada and the United States at this point. If you know, you can let me know in the comment section below. That would be fantastic to know. So even if it was a couple of weeks, he could quarantine and still make it back for July. But it depends what what John Cena has up on the schedule. Just because he's finishing the Peacemaker TV series doesn't mean he hasn't got other stuff lined up. He's a very busy man. He's a man in demand. Lots of people want to have John Cena on their productions, on their movies, on their television series. As I mentioned, the Fast and Furious Fast and Furious 9, something like that, Fast and Furious Infinity. John Cena is the main villain in that. I don't know when that's set to come out. I know it's been delayed a ton of times, but I don't know when he starts doing press and promotion for that. So all of these things do have to be considered when it comes to John Cena. But if it's not Cena, it will be someone else. It will be Brock Lesnar. Becky Lynch, I think, is almost confirmed to be coming back at this point. July, I think, is a good time frame for her physically. There's been a few images around of her training at the moment. She looks to be in great shape. I think July's a reasonable, sensible time frame for an appearance. In terms of a match, I would save that until maybe SummerSlam in August. That gives her plenty of time to get ready, to get physically ready for that. So I think if it's not John Cena, Becky Lynch is definitely coming back. Brock Lesnar, I would be stunned if WWE isn't already having discussions when it comes to Brock Lesnar about his future or his plans going forward in WWE. I think, again, that's inevitable. Daniel Bryan, of course, is another name that I think will re-sign with WWE. So they've got multiple irons in the fire. But of course, they would love to kick off. They would love to kick off the first SmackDown or the first television show with fans back in attendance with John Cena open up the show, and eventually that leading to a John Cena match at SummerSlam if it takes place in a stadium or something like that, because John Cena is one of the biggest WWE superstars of all time. As I mentioned, he is the modern day Hulk Hogan, or certainly the Hulk Hogan of my generation, and he's got that legendary status. It's to the point now where the people that used to boo John Cena don't boo him anymore, because we're just so glad to have him back on the show whenever he comes back, and he's transcended that level of respect that you don't care about his character anymore. You just care about seeing John Cena because it's that special. And John Cena hasn't wrestled a proper traditional wrestling match since January of 2019. Yes, it's been over 2 years since John Cena's wrestled a proper match. Of course, he was meant to face, as I mentioned, Bray Wyatt at WrestleMania 36. That was going to be a normal match inside Raymond James Stadium, John Cena versus The Fiend. I think he was probably going to put The Fiend over in that match. But, of course, because of the pandemic, it didn't happen. And then instead, we got the Firefly Funhouse cinematic match, which, to be honest, for me, wasn't a match. It was a presentation. Not that I had any problem with it. I thought it was very entertaining and very creative considering the circumstances that they found themselves in, but it wasn't a match. So we haven't seen John Cena have a full-on, proper, traditional pro wrestling match in over 2 years. So that in itself is a massive story. So very exciting, and hopefully we see John Cena back on WWE programming very soon. Now, I do want to move on and talk about the Velveteen Dream. Obviously, this has been something that lots of people have been talking about since the Velveteen Dream was released by WWE earlier this week. Speaking of John Cena, of course, John Cena at one point said the Velveteen Dream was the guy, or the one, rather. He was the one when asked who's going to be the one that's going to be the future of WWE, who's going to be the next big star in WWE. John Cena said Velveteen Dream was the one, and obviously, this was a guy that at one period of time had all of the tools to succeed in WWE. He could have been the next big star in that company, and it's one of the biggest falls from grace ever in WWE history in terms of a guy that just was on the rocket ship. He was on the rise, had so much potential, and then It just all went wrong. It all went wrong for the Velveteen Dream. Anyway, as I mentioned, the Velveteen Dream was released by WWE on Thursday afternoon. He had not appeared on WWE NXT TV since losing to Adam Cole in December, and after being away for some time, he was backstage at the May 10 Raw show, but was never scheduled to appear. Now, in an update, Brian Alvarez of F4W Online reported yesterday on Wrestling Observer Live, the radio show, that the Dream had friends in WWE who were, quote, very, very high up in the company. This reportedly led to some people feeling uncomfortable with going to management about his behavior because he was close to management. It was also indicated that Dream's release was not due to previous allegations against him, but more because of behavioral issues. Now, there had been talk about behavioral issues with the Velveteen Dream from his time in NXT, from when he went to other places such as Evolve. Of course, Evolve was eventually bought by WWE. There's rumors and discussions about an NXT Evolve brand being launched very, very soon in the near future. But the Velveteen Dream represented the company at Evolve 113 in September 2018, and then at Evolve 123 and Evolve 124 in March of 2019. Now, in addition to being backstage at Raw earlier this month after being away for some time, Dream was training at the WWE Performance Center last week, according to the Wrestling Observer. Now, there's no word on what Dream might be planning for the future, but he is under the standard 30-day, they're saying, non-compete clause with his NXT contract. I believe the NXT contracts are different to the main roster contract. So if you get released from NXT, it's 30 days. If you get released from the main roster, it's 90 days. I could be wrong with that, but I think that's the general rule of thumb there. He will be free to sign with other companies after Saturday, June 19. Now, the Velveteen Dream having behavioral issues, I think, is interesting. And the fact that he had friends in high places. The news that he had friends in high places is not news at all, really, because frankly, given the allegations against him, and I know it's always really, really important to state this, they were allegations, no charges were filed. Obviously, there was very compromising evidence in terms of screenshots, audio clips, etc. That's obviously not distinct enough, and that's not concrete enough, and I understand that. But the way this whole Velveteen Dream situation is handled, and I have a feeling, well, I have more than a feeling. I've seen some things on social media from some reputable people about stories that could be heading in the future. You're going to have to watch this space. I won't talk about it too much in depth here because I think it's going to be stories that are breaking over the course of the next few days, with more people willing to go on record now that certain people are no longer with the company. But there is a lot more to this. I think the most disturbing aspect of the whole Velveteen Dream situation with WWE, as we mentioned before, is why did it take so long? The feeling now is, from what I'm reading, and I guess this is just the feeling that I'm getting here, is that, as Brian Alvarez mentions there, it's very apparent he had friends in high places. I don't know if Brian Alvarez knows that for a fact, by the way. I think Brian Alvarez is making the same assumption that most people are, that given all of the things that were against him during his time in NXT, whether it is the allegations, whether it is these reported behavioral issues, whether it's just the pattern of being on NXT television for a while and then getting pulled off and then being brought back and then getting pulled off, there was obviously something going on there. And for most people, that would be enough. That would be enough for most people to get released from the contract. It's apparent that people high up in WWE or NXT liked the Velveteen Dream. They thought money was there to be made, and there was a hope that eventually he'd mature, or eventually he'd get over whatever issues he had. The guy's 25 years old, and maybe it's a bit of a, I don't like to make this comparison, but maybe it's a bit of a Randy Orton situation. Randy Orton, if you hear some of the stories about Randy Orton earlier on in his career in terms of immaturity and his behavioral stuff backstage, the guy was crazy. The guy was crazy. Some of those Randy Orton stories are horrifying. I mean, really horrifying. And he had to go through the process of getting suspended a ton of times and all this kind of stuff. And then eventually something clicked, he matured, and he became who he is today, one of the most successful WWE superstars of all time. Now, I'm not saying that Randy Orton and the Velveteen Dream are the same, far from it, but maybe that was the hope by those officials in NXT or WWE. I don't know. It is, I think, very obvious that he did have friends in high places, because nobody would have lasted as long as he did. And the question must be, why did it take so long? And maybe it is a case that, you know, he didn't get fired because of the allegations. I don't think he did, because I think if he was to get fired because of the allegations, that would have happened a long, long time ago. These allegations are nearly a year old at this point, so I don't know if it has anything to do with the allegations. I think it's more a case of, like they were saying, maybe a continued pattern of behavioral issues or continued pattern of incidents. I think more are going to come to light soon. And if there are reported budget cuts that have been used as an excuse for these recent NXT releases, then it just everything adds up and they go, look, he's having a lot of problems. It's time after time after time. We're not even using him at this point because of these problems. Enough's enough. And we've got to trim the fat in terms of the budget, and he's made it very easy for us. Maybe that's the case when it comes to the Velveteen Dream. I don't know. I just think that it's a shame. It is a shame. And not so much that it's a shame because this is a guy that, he doesn't deserve all these terrible things that are coming to him. I've seen a lot of people defending the Velveteen Dream, and I'm not sure, to be honest, truly where that comes from, if I'm going to be brutally honest. I guess maybe those... are a fan of his talent, are a fan of his work, are a fan of his character, and I'm totally with people in terms of, the due process and innocent until proven guilty. As I mentioned, no charges were filed and all that kind of stuff. The only thing I would say is, like I said, there is a continued pattern of behavior here, and there's a lot of smoke to this fire. And look, at the end of the day, it's a massive waste of talent. It's a huge waste of talent, and it's a shame. As I mentioned before, do I think the Velveteen Dream will work again? Yes, I do. Do I think he'll come back to WWE? I mean... who knows, right? Who knows? If he can rebuild his reputation, I don't see how he does, but who knows? Like I said, do I think the Velveteen Dream will work again? Yes, I do. With the world opening back up and professional wrestling being what it is and independent promoters being what they are, if they feel they can make money off a Velveteen Dream appearance, which they know they can, then I think that they'll book him. Alberto Del Rio's got a plethora of allegations and charges against him. I think he's due to stand trial at some point that are not good. He could go to jail for a significant amount of time. He's being booked. He's facing Andrade soon. So anything's possible. Anything's possible. If promoters think that there's money to be made, they'll hire the Velveteen Dream in a heartbeat. In a heartbeat. So I don't think this is the end of the Velveteen Dream's career by any stretch of the imagination. Maybe on a national scale, but certainly not a state level. Let's talk about Hell in the Cell, because this one's, it's not really a surprise, to be honest, but it looks like Bobby Lashley's Hell in the Cell opponent has been revealed. Now, after a great WrestleMania Backlash, the next pay-per-view is Hell in the Cell in June. Now, a big match being planned for the pay-per-view by all accounts, and again, this is according to Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, is Bobby Lashley versus Drew McIntyre for the WWE Championship inside Hell in a Cell. Now, as I've mentioned before, if you watched any of the videos we've done on the channel, this is where I felt things were going. I mentioned it on the Raw reaction on Monday. Now, the two face each other, of course, in the opening match of WrestleMania 37 Night 1. Bobby Lashley defeated Drew McIntyre after McIntyre passed out to the Hurt Lock. Following that, we had the triple threat match of WrestleMania Backlash. And now it looks like we're going to have the rubber match, if you will, inside Satan's structure, inside Hell in a Cell next month. This is what Meltzer had to say, quote, "So Hell in a Cell is being moved to the 20th of June without any Hell in a Cell program being at the level one would expect for such show. Hell in a Cell should be the culmination of a feud, and the only program that appears at this point to be ready for it would be Bobby Lashley versus Drew McIntyre for the WWE Championship." Now, I must stress this because I say this all the time when it comes to Dave Meltzer, but it's worth repeating here. This is not news. This is not news. This is opinion. This is opinion by Dave Meltzer. Where there does it ever say that WWE are planning to do Bobby Lashley versus Drew McIntyre inside Hell in a Cell? It doesn't. It doesn't. Dave Meltzer there has done the exact same thing that I said, that most people said on social media, that given the feud, one would logically suggest it's going to be Lashley versus McIntyre inside Hell in a Cell. That's the feud that's been going a while. That makes sense. There's no news there that Meltzer is saying that, this is the plan, this is what they're trying to do. There's nothing there that says that. Nothing. This is kind of the confusion that some people have, is that if Dave Meltzer says it, or if Brian Alvarez said it, or if it's in the Observer, or if it's in the newsletters or whatever, then it's fact. It's opinion. In the same way that you watching this video have an opinion, and I love that, and I really enjoy everyone that gets involved in the comment section, shares their opinion, because guess what? Your opinion is just as valid. Just as valid as my opinion, or Dave Meltzer's opinion, or Brian Alvarez's opinion, or Sean Ross Sapp's opinion, or whoever's opinion. It's just as valid. It's not news, it's opinion, and that's what that is. I don't think he's wrong. I think it's relatively obvious that that's probably the match that's going to happen. I know after Raw on Monday, lots of people are saying, are we going to see Kofi Mania 2? We're going to see Kofi Kingston involved in the WWE Championship picture once again, and all this kind of stuff. Look, don't worry. I would love to see Kofi Kingston involved in the WWE Championship picture again. I think it's criminal that you invest like 6 months into this guy being the WWE Champion, and then the moment he loses it in like 8 seconds, by the way, he then goes straight back into tag team wrestling, never gets another opportunity, never goes back in the main event. I mean, you had 6 months of this guy being in the main event, and then you just drop it. Why? I don't know. I don't know, but it's no surprise that Lashley and McIntyre will be facing off inside Hell in a Cell. Again, we don't know if this is the case, but it makes the most sense, doesn't it? And hopefully it should main event the show. We'll touch on this in a second, but I think the WWE Championship should main event a show. It did at Hell in a Cell last October, and it should again here in June. Now, let's talk about The Miz, of course, about WrestleMania Backlash. The Miz had, obviously, a torn ACL during his lumberjack match against Damian Priest. While it's being reported by Dave Meltzer, once again, of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, that the injury might not be as bad as originally thought. Again, this is murky here. This is very murky here. This is what Meltzer had to say, quote, Miz was injured in the match. We were told it was an ACL injury, but it isn't clear yet whether it was partial or complete tear. If it's the former, the recovery time will be a lot shorter and he won't necessarily need surgery. A complete tear usually requires surgery, which has 6 months or more recovery time. That's it. That's it. That's it. And again, if you watch any of the videos we did here on the channel, or if you read anything online, this is what loads of people have said here, that if he completely has torn his ACL, of course he will need surgery because he won't be able to walk. If it's a partial tear, then he might not need surgery. There are people that wrestle for a while with a partially torn ACL or MCL or anything like that. Eventually, they all need to get the surgery. Eventually, they do need to get it fixed. And sometimes it gets to a point, I think Jeff Hardy had a similar situation where they can wrestle on it for a while, but eventually it will go. And then eventually you need the surgery and you're going to be out for like 9 months or a year or something like that. The Miz, we don't know. There hasn't been any real reports about the severity of the Miz's injury in terms of if it's a complete tear or it's a partial tear or anything like that. And it might just be a case, even if it's a partial tear, Miz might decide, you know what, I need to get it fixed. I'll get it fixed anyway. I don't know. And I don't think Meltzer knows either. Once again, it's this confusion between opinion and fact. That there is not news. You know, the news is that they don't know. I mean, I can say that. I don't know. I don't know what the severity is of the Miz's injury. I just think it's funny. Basically, what happens for those that don't really know about the situation, when it comes to a Friday, obviously the Observer comes out on a Friday. And a lot of the websites and a lot of the journalists pick up Meltzer's stories and attribute them. And some weeks, like this week, there isn't a lot of substance in there. It's a lot of what we've heard previously in the weeks. I think, for instance, in my opinion, Fightful over the course of the last few days or the last week or so have just been nailing all of these stories. They've been first to report, or they've been first to confirm reports, or they've broken a ton of stories. They're on fire at the moment. And then you get the Observer that comes out on a Friday, and it's just got more of the same information that Sean Ross Sapp or the guys at there at Fightful have reported. And by the way, Fightful don't get the credit from the Observer. I wonder why. It's just stuff like this. I find it fascinating. I really do find it fascinating. It's the world of wrestling journalism is always fascinating to see. It really is. Let's finish it off here talking about WrestleMania Backlash. And once again, talking about Meltzer, I know, unfortunately. I know people will say, well, you're railing. Why would you say this? But this is a story that I have heard a couple of times. And that's that there was a change to the plan in terms of the match schedule for WrestleMania Backlash last Sunday. Now, of course, the main event saw Cesaro versus Roman Reigns for the Universal Championship. Roman Reigns won that match, retained the Universal Championship. But Meltzer, during the latest Wrestling Observer newsletter, has revealed that the WWE Championship match featuring Bobby Lashley, Braun Strowman, and Drew McIntyre was originally set to main event the show. However, a last-minute decision led to WWE putting Roman Reigns' position as the main event instead. This is what Meltzer had to say, quote, "The original idea was for the three-way for the Raw title to be the main event. The three-way Raw Women's title match wasn't scheduled to open either. There was a push on the day of the show with the idea that Reigns is the only franchise player on the roster, and as such, he should either go first or last. Now, it was also added that the match between Cesaro and Reigns was set to be longer, so it made sense for the bout to go on last at WrestleMania Backlash. WWE did not want the audience to feel drained by the time the WWE Championship match took place, especially if it happened right after the Universal Championship contest." This is what he had to say, quote, "There was also the idea that since he and Cesaro were going to do a long match, that it might leave the audience flat for the three-way to have to follow. It seemed to work out for the best with the late change." So there you go. I think, to be honest, I know there's a lot of people There's a lot of people reacting to that, going, oh, Roman Reigns main eventing, he shouldn't have main evented. Yes, he should have main evented. It was the best match on the show. It was the longest match on the show. Now, obviously, just because it's the longest match on the show doesn't mean it should main event. But to be honest, they're right. If that's their justification there of going, look, it's a really long match, we're going to follow that with the WWE Championship match, the audience would have been flat. They would have been flat, and it would have made the main event feel weak. And like I said, it was the best match on the show, and they're right. Roman Reigns is the only franchise player in WWE right now. It just is. There are people on Raw that maybe could compete with Roman Reigns, whether it's Lesnar or Lesnar, whether it's Bobby Lashley or McIntyre or anyone like that. But to be honest, nobody is on Roman Reigns' level right now. Not even close. Not even close. Roman Reigns is the most compelling thing on WWE television right now. He's in the best angles. He's in the best segments. SmackDown is the Roman Reigns show. It's the Roman Reigns soap opera and drama, and it's very, very good. And he's more than justified in being the main event of all these pay-per-views. And I know that people can say, well, that doesn't make the WWE Championship look good, or it doesn't make Raw look good. Guess what? Raw isn't good at the moment. So I think its position is justified on the card. Now, people might say, well, why wouldn't you put the WWE Championship in the main event? It makes Raw and it makes the WWE Championship feel bigger. But right now, you would be lying to yourself if you say that Roman Reigns isn't the biggest and best thing in WWE. That's just a fact. That's how it is. And it was the right decision. It was the best match on the show. It was the longest match on the show. It was the perfect place to main event. That's it. And if it didn't main event, I would have been very surprised. So I think WWE, in fairness, got that one right. But look, guys, as always, it's just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on all the news stories we've spoken about today? John Cena's possible upcoming WWE return, the Velveteen Dream's WWE behavioral issues, Bobby Lashley's opponent for Hell in a Cell, the Miz's ACL injury, and the WrestleMania Backlash match change. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about WWE, AEW, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube, go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video, along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.